It's taken them long enough, but we finally have a big capacity twin-cylinder KTM in India, and that's something worth celebrating. This is the 790 Duke, and going by the fact that KTM has nicknamed it the Scalpel, you know it's probably going to be something quite special. KTM started with a blank sheet of paper for this motorcycle with the aim to create one of the most precise and exciting machines in the middleweight naked segment. The first step in that journey was to make the bike look the part, and as a result, the bodywork is sharp but as minimal as possible. The tall fuel tank, edgy extensions, upswept exhaust and that chunky swing arm add heaps of character, but at the same time, the rear looks quite bland and I wish the 390 style headlamp had its own identity. Still, the overall effect carries the trademark KTM style aggression and quality levels are quite good as well. But the standout factor is that this motorcycle is really quite compact. This tightly packaged theme mirrors what's happening underneath, and KTM has taken a couple of very interesting engineering solutions to make the 790 as light as possible. Let's take the frame for example. Almost every single road-going KTM uses a trellis frame, but you won't see those trademark metal triangles on the 790. And that's because KTM decided to use a more compact tubular steel frame instead, while the entire rear subframe is made out of aluminium. The result is a main frame that weighs just 8.8 kilos, while the rear subframe weighs in at less than 2 kilos per side. Those cutouts on the subframe aren't just for style either, and they serve as air intakes for the engine, which itself is a load-bearing part of the frame. And since the engine is typically one of the heaviest aspects of a motorcycle, this is the second area where KTM became innovative in the quest of dropping the kilos. It's now common knowledge that this is KTM's first ever parallel twin engine. But why go down that road? Well, once again, the answer comes in terms of packaging and getting everything as slim as possible. KTM found that its traditional V-twin layout simply didn't allow the packaging and weight-saving levels that they were striving for, so they went for a parallel twin layout instead. This 8-valve DOHC motor displaces 799cc and it runs a high compression ratio of 12.7:1, which helps it to put out 105 horsepower and 87 Nm of torque. The power figure is the lowest in the segment, but the torque is almost class-leading, and that's what characterizes the riding experience. Speaking of character, KTM has gone down the increasingly popular path of using an uneven firing order to give the engine a more textured sound and feel that is quite reminiscent of its V-twins. The result is a loud, angry and quite likable beat from the exhaust. The interesting thing is that the motor is actually much smoother than the sound would have you believe, and vibration levels are very well controlled. It also seems quite content to ride smoothly at low RPM, especially in rain or street mode. There are 4 riding modes in total, and rain offers a 2% drop in power with very mellow responses, while street, sport and track offer increasing levels of throttle aggression as you go up. Performance is engaging to the point that you'll be laughing out loud in your helmet, and the short gearing only serves to further exaggerate the 790's superb low and mid-range punch. You have to be quick with chasing the gears through the 6-speed transmission, especially because the engine charges into the red line at just 9,500 RPM. Out on Bajaj's test track, the acceleration through the tight sections was intoxicating, and the bike topped out at about 230 kph on the long straights. But as much of a joy as this engine is, the real star of the 790 is the chassis. You get a sense of this the moment you sit on the 790 Duke and discover that it feels almost as narrow as a 390. It feels far more compact than any of its rivals, and the sense of lightness and agility is amazing. With a curb weight of just about 187 kilos, the 790 Duke is on par with the Street Triple S as the lightest in its class. But this is on paper, and it feels noticeably lighter when you're actually riding the bike. It is no surprise then that the 790 leaps into corners with absolutely minimal effort, and it changes directions lightning fast as well. The good news is that this doesn't come at the expense of stability, partly because this bike has among the longest wheelbases in its class, but also because there's a steering damper which helps prevent the handlebar from getting too loose and wild. The suspension is by WP, but it only comes with preload adjustment for the rear shock, which is a bit disappointing, although the setup is very nicely balanced. The bike feels confident and well damped, but neither end comes across as too stiff, and I think this is a setup that should work quite decently on the street as well. On the track though, the 790 is such an enjoyable toy that I just couldn't get enough, and given the choice, I'd be out lapping all day on it. None of its rivals feel this effortless, and it took just one lap around what is an unfamiliar circuit to me before the corner speeds and lean angles were at camera-worthy levels. On the track, the only things I wished for were more revs and any form of wind protection, because repeatedly holding on at 220 kph causes a pretty sore neck the next day. When it is time to slow down, the J-Joan brakes work really well, and while they may not have the sheer bite of a superbike, they're very strong and pack good progression and feel. It's a similar story with the Maxxis tires, which aren't quite track day tires, but they make for capable sport tires in the dry, and they didn't feel like a compromise on the track. Besides which, the 790's smooth and smart electronic system keeps everything in check, even when the rear tire eventually finds its limit. And that's the next party trick the 790 has up its sleeve, because I can confidently stand here and tell you that this bike has the best electronics that you will find on any motorcycle at the price point. Let's begin with the riding modes. The first three are preset, but track mode allows you plenty of customization. Within track mode, you can disengage the wheelie control, and if you do that, power wheelies in first gear become a very regular affair. There's even a launch control system, although this becomes active only after the bike crosses the first 1000 kilometers, so we couldn't try that out on the fresh machines that we had to ride. In track mode, I found the throttle response a bit too aggressive, but you can dial this back within the mode settings, and it was much nicer when set to sport. But my favorite part of the track mode is that it allows you to shift between 9 levels of traction control on the move using just the up and down arrow buttons on the handlebar. The 790 uses an inertial measurement unit, better known as an IMU, so the traction control system is corner sensitive, as is the ABS. If you like, the rear ABS can be deactivated, but the entire system can't be turned off. Now, a lot of this is segment first stuff, and the 790 is also the first to offer an up and down quick shifter at this price point. The system works quite well, but I did encounter a few missed upshifts, and MV Agusta continues to be the gold standard in this regard. Nevertheless, all these electronics work with the potent engine and chassis to make the 790 a very exciting machine that you can safely enjoy pushing to your limits. But let's not forget, this is a street bike after all. This is where the 790 surprised me, because I now have a feeling that it has the potential to be a nice street bike even out on our roads. There are quite a few aspects that suggest the 790 will be quite friendly out on the street as well. The turning radius is tight, the clutch is decently light, and the engine's low speed manners are quite smooth, definitely more so than the 390 Duke. There's also plenty of ground clearance, and while the riding position is sporty, it's also spacious and it's not too committed. The one downside I can see for now is that some people won't like the seat height, although the bike's narrowness certainly makes it easier to get your feet down. More importantly though, we still need to evaluate the engine's heat management and see just how hot things get for both the rider and the pillion. And with that, it's now time to talk about the price. At an introductory price of Rs 8.63 lakh ex-showroom, the 790 is not as affordable as most of us had hoped. The thing is that over the past 7 years, KTM has taught us to expect thrilling performance at an unbelievable price. Unfortunately for the 790, it comes to India as a CKD kit, and the only localization at the moment is in regard to small things like the engine and sari guards. But if you look at the international pricing, the 790 Duke is positioned above its 4-cylinder Japanese rivals and below the Euro competition from Triumph and Ducati, and that's the case in our market as well. In that sense, the price can be reasoned, and while this KTM doesn't offer game-changing pricing, it does a superb job of making you fall in love with its performance. I came here today fully expecting this to be a fun bike, but I didn't think it would be this much of a laugh. The first part of the test is complete, and the 790 Duke is an absolute riot of a motorcycle to play around with. Now all we have to see is what it's like in the real world, and personally, I can't wait to find out.